Hey friends, welcome to episode 559 of the My 123 Cents podcast. This is a non-wrestling episode, uh, starting at the beginning of the year, and I explain this every month. I don't know why, but I do. I do have my wrestling background. This room is kind of undergoing a transition, and so I will have another part of this studio, if you will, that will be non-wrestling related, but I'm not quite there yet. But once a month, I try to do a non-wrestling topic, uh, quite frankly, to just maybe engage with and get other people listening and or watching. If you are watching on YouTube, you notice that I'm wearing a polo shirt that says, got the NBC Peacock, the number 15, WOWL Florence. And this is, I put a poll up, people voted, and all three topics eventually are going to be discussed here on the non-wrestling versions of the podcast. But the early TV days is what folks wanted to hear about. So I'm going to talk about my time. I spent, for those who are new to this podcast, I spent 22 years from 1997 until 2019 in the TV news business. Actually, there was a year before that in 96 that I worked behind the scenes at a TV station in St. Louis called KMOV, CBS affiliate there. But this will kind of tie in with the college years a little bit. And I've talked a little bit about this in the past too. So I'm going to just get everybody caught up and on the same page. When I was in college, I wasn't not 100% sure what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be. I knew I wanted to do something in mass communication. At one point early on, I wanted to be a radio disc jockey. However, where I went to school, Southeast Missouri State University, for whatever reason, the radio classes were not very popular. I did some volunteer work at the uh, campus radio station, but to take classes, they were not being offered on a regular, consistent enough basis for me to continue on. So I shifted gears and went into media. I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember now the exact title of it. It was mass communication. Um, Man, I am drawing a blank. I think it's media studies is what my major technically is. And I can't believe I'm drawing a blank, but anyway, I am. So I really took kind of a hodgepodge. I took some advertising, I took some public relations, some corporate video. So I learned how to record video and edit, but I was not good at editing video at all. And in fact, when I got my first job in TV at KMOV, I was working behind, again, it was behind the scenes stuff. It was uh, the exact title. My first stint there at KMOV uh, started in 1996, in June of 96. And I was a broadcast assistant was the title. And I was basically the teleprompter operator for the 6 and 10 o'clock newscasts. And so the producers would print the scripts. I would go take them off the printer. And back then, they were printed on 4 sheets of the carbon paper. And so I would separate the scripts into 4 piles. Uh, the producer got a copy, the director got a copy, and each of the anchors got a copy. And they were color coded. And so I knew that one anchors were blue, the other anchors were pink, and they were both male anchors. So that always turned into a thing. But anyway, that's kind of how I got my introduction into TV news because, like I said, at SEMO, there was no TV. At that time, there was no TV broadcasting curriculum, but I knew that I wanted to try the TV thing. And honestly, when I first got there, I wasn't 100% sure that that was going to be for me. And I actually contemplated and thought about going back to school to get my teaching degree. And I often wonder, I mean, I would not be, I probably, I don't know that I'd be doing this podcast. I don't know because doing the TV news thing gave me an extreme amount of confidence that I did not have before. And so it made me less leery, apprehensive, shy about being around cameras and talking to people. And I'm still introverted in ways, but it really opened me up to being more willing to put myself out there and do the podcast. So I don't know if I'd gone the teaching route, who knows what would have happened. I know that I would probably be much closer to retirement than I am today, but that's a story for another time. But I ended up sticking around and at KMOV, there were several reporters there and photographers who would let me go out with them on news stories. And in St. Louis at the time, I don't know if it's still this way or not, but this was 1996. It was all unionized. And so you could not touch the equipment. Like I could not, I literally, even just picking up a camera was frowned upon because I was not in that union. You had to be in the right union to touch or participate with that equipment. And I was in one of the unions because back then, eventually I went from being that broadcast assistant teleprompter operator to a production assistant where I was on the floor as a floor director, so wearing a headset, listening to the director and giving the anchors and the weather person cues, letting them know what camera they're going to be on, letting them know how much time was left before the end of the newscast, a commercial break, whatever the case may be. Or you were either on the floor or you were in the tape room. And basically, as the tape person, you were getting all of the cassettes that were, bigger than a VHS tape, but, we would get those tapes in order. You'd have a rundown, put them all in order, and then you would just hand them off to the tape operator who they had 4 different tape decks. He'd slide the tape in, cue it to the right spot. You as the tape organizer would make sure that it was matching the time code that was on your sheet and it was the right story. Sometimes there were mistakes. You see the wrong video play on the newscast. That's all human error right there. And so that's my then next, let's see, I started doing that, I think in October of 97 or 96, and I did that until October of 97. And so in that year, I was also substitute teaching because this was a part-time gig and the hours varied. Sometimes I'd do the morning show, sometimes I'd do the evening show, sometimes I'd do the noon show, sometimes I would do the morning show and the evening show, or do the evening show and then the morning show. Those days sucked. But anyway, that was kind of the gig, and I was glad to get the experience because that's what I was really looking to do. I knew I was not going to break in St. Louis as a reporter. I just didn't have the ability or the skills to do that. And so I did that. I went out with reporters. I was making resume tapes. They would let me, rewrite their stories and stuff. So I was doing that, putting stuff together. Because back then you put it onto a VHS tape and then you sent those off to TV stations all around the country. And I literally, all over the country, Oregon, California, Texas, New York, Minnesota, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, everywhere. I was sending tapes out everywhere and I wasn't having any luck. I was getting quite discouraged. And that's when, the thoughts maybe teacher, those things started coming in because I was newly married at the time. And my wife was very supportive and very, had my back and was helping me in the search. And back then there was a thing called Media Line. It was subscribed to it. You could get online and look, but you also called, and I would call that line all the time or get online and look. tvjobs.com had a subscription to that and just looking to find any openings. And then, like I said, just sending off tape after tape after tape. And I went on a few interviews. I even at one point got in the car and drove to St. Joseph, Missouri, and to Topeka, Kansas, and just booked a hotel room and just kind of spent the night in that area and went TV station to TV station with my tape in hand, just kind of showing up, hoping that maybe there'd be something. I had one news director that sat down with me and watched the tape with me and gave me some feedback critiques. They weren't hiring at the time, but it was just that grind of trying to get in any way that I could. And so obviously those markets didn't work out. Nothing with that happened. And I remember it was the fall of 97 and early October. And I had gotten a call from a TV station in Florence, Alabama, WOWL. I remember I was at my job in St. Louis at KMOV. It was my dinner break, and I had called back then on your no cell phone, but your landline. You could. We didn't have an answering machine. It was voicemail, and so you could call that voicemail and get your messages. And I remember calling and doing it and getting the message that Todd Napier, the news director at WOWL, was interested in doing an interview, wanted to do it as soon as possible. I was ecstatic. And so I called him back, set it up. My wife had her wisdom teeth removed that morning. We literally got in the car and drove from St. Louis to Florence. He had said, if you get here in time, because it was about a 6 hour drive from St. Louis, if you get here in time, come watch the 6 o'clock news and we'll go out to dinner. And we got there, I mean, just before the newscast started. I dropped my wife off at the hotel. I went to the TV station. I watched the newscast. He anchored it. He was the news director. He anchored the newscast. We went to dinner. We ate at this Italian place in Florence. I can't remember the name of it, but great food. Uh, we're sitting there talking, and keep in mind again, this is 1997. But he had said to me, "What are you thinking in terms of salary?" And at that time, most of the places that I was looking at, the starting salary was between $19,000 and $22,000, and so I threw that number. And he said, "We can offer you 12, maybe 13." I was making more part-time at KMOV than that was going to be. And I remember feeling like this crushing defeat. But here's the misconception of TV news, especially in local markets and especially in small markets. Florence was part of the Huntsville, Alabama market, but Huntsville, Alabama was at that time, market 80, 81, somewhere in there, which is not bad out of 214 or 217 markets. But Florence was on the other side of town, other side of the state. It was like a 70-mile gap between the two communities. And when WOWL was established, it was before any of the other TV stations. And allegedly, the owners built in Florence thinking that that was going to be the booming metropolis. Well, it ended up being Huntsville Space and Rocket Center. All of the technology, all of that ended up going to Huntsville, and that's where all the other TV stations went, which also presented an awkward thing because they also, in Huntsville, had an NBC affiliate. And as you can see on my shirt, if you're watching, WOWL was also an NBC affiliate. So there were two competing NBC affiliates in the same market. But if you didn't have in Huntsville, you were not watching WOWL. The brain was very small. But again, it's part of that market. If you had cable in Florence, in the Shoals area, it was called the Shoals, Muscle Shoals. It's on Sweet Home, Alabama. If you had cable in the Shoals, you could pick up Huntsville stations, but that was the only way you were going to see that. Otherwise, you were kind of stuck watching us, and then there was an independent station that was actually not very good either. But I remember going back to the hotel after this dinner meeting, telling my wife it's $12,000 to $13,000 is the salary. And without missing a beat, she said, "You have to take it. This is your foot in the door, get the experience, and then move on." Because that's how TV news works. You go someplace, especially if you are in a small market, you go and get that year or two of experience, something bigger, and hopefully something better. So I went to the TV station the next day, and this was, he hadn't offered me the job. He was just telling me what the price range was going to be. But I had a really good feeling. I went back to the station the next day and did the official, but really we sat together with dinner, pretty much asked all the questions and whatnot, but ended up going back to the station. And I'm not sure, I'm trying to remember. I think it might have been a day or two later, called me back and offered the job. And I, of course, gladly accepted. And my first day there was in November of, no, I think it was November 2nd or 3rd. My last day at KMOV was on Halloween 1987. So Friday night, we got up Saturday morning with a moving truck, my vehicle, my wife's vehicle. My parents went, my in-laws went, and my best friend and my brother. And we headed south and went to, trying to remember. Yeah, my brother went to. We headed south and went to Alabama, and we get there because we had gone down in between. So when I got the job, we drove back down there and found the park and went back home and obviously moved. And we get to the apartment. I was behind because I was driving a moving truck. My wife and in-laws got there before we did. And the girl that was living in our apartment was not moved out. All of her stuff was in the middle of the living room floor. She was supposed to be out. They were supposed to come in and steam clean the carpets and all that. So anyway, they're scrambling to get her out. They go in, they steam clean the carpets. We wait until Sunday morning to move our stuff in because the carpets are wet. Wake up Monday morning, and at this job, most TV stations, you see their news vehicles driving around town. Well, this place didn't have. So you have to drive your own car. So I get up Monday morning, go out to my car, and I have a flat. And I'm panicking. So I end up driving my wife's car to work. She ends up a couple days later getting a job at a daycare there. But anyway, she's like, take my car and we'll get this taken care of later. So sure enough, I did that. And I remember my first day there was there was a murder investigation. One out, actually, she ended up being the receptionist at the TV station and eventually salesperson. Her grandfather had been killed. And we didn't know it at the time that it was her grandfather, but that was my first day there, was going out and shadowing with another reporter, Jennifer Millwright, who was and I'm still friends with her on Facebook and keep in touch, but she was the reporter and the 6 o'clock. No, maybe yeah, I think she did the 6 o'clock news, but with Todd. And so we end up going and she's kind of showing me how the cameras work and kind of what they do, their protocols and what I think, if this was TV folks will understand. I mean, this was small market, a small market gets. There were four of us. There were four reporters. Part-time weather guy and a sports guy. And the weather guy literally came in. His name was Randy Paul. He was a radio guy. He would come in around 5:30, do the 6, then he would come back and do the 10. Like right before the 10, he would get there at 10 o'clock. And then he would record things that they dropped in the Today Show. We didn't have a morning show. We didn't have weekends. It was literally 6 and 10 Monday to Friday. No vehicles, drove our own cars, one-man band, which means, you take the camera out, you go out, and now they call that, or the buzzword that they're calling now. Back then it was one-man band. Hit the ground running, going out, getting as many stories as you could because you're filling content. We didn't have computers either. Typewriters. Everything was done on a typewriter. And so there was no Googling. I think we had a newsroom computer, but I don't think Google was even a thing back then. But so yeah, it was, you pull out the yellow pages, you would call and set up your stories. You had a foldable map in the car that you would get your directions from, and we had scanners, little handheld scanners. So we heard police activity, would hear that, and we'd get in the car and head out and go figure out what was going on. And remember, I hadn't been there probably more than 2 or 3 weeks. And a firefighter, a prominent firefighter, had died of cancer. And they were doing his memorial. And it was right before the 6 o'clock news. So they wanted me to go and, no live truck, no way to feedback video. So like if you had to go to something, you do it, and then you bring it back, edit it, and then take that tape, run it to the tape operator, and then they would play it. And so this firefighter had died, and they were doing a procession for the funeral. And his casket was on the back of the fire truck, and it's a big scene. And I remember going, the truck comes by, and I thought I hit record, and I did. I was recording, and then I pushed it again, and I was not. I remember then hitting it to stop recording. Well, then it starts recording, and I freaked out because this thing had gone past me and it's down the road, and I got to still get back to get it onto the news for the 6. I was panicked, freaking out, and I got very small clip. I was able to get a shot of it from down the road or whatever, but it looked crap. No, I ain't gonna get fired. I'm gonna get in trouble. I'm screwed. We did have a computer in the news because now I remember getting back in. Todd, the news director, and Eddie, the sports guy, were sitting at this computer playing a hockey game. And I'm trying to explain. It's like, I mean, he was so chill and so laid back, and it was like, hey, it's okay, man, don't worry about it. We'll see. And so we were able to salvage the little bit of video that I did get, um, and I had gotten some interviews and stuff, so we were able to put something together. But man, telling you this, I look at the year, almost 2 years that I was in Alabama. I guess I was there November of '97 to June of '99, and so almost 2 years. And it was kind of like grad school. It was kind of like getting that education because I didn't have that experience in college, so I was using all of these experiences to kind of build up that resume. And so, you know, Todd eventually ends up leaving that spring of '98. And so Jennifer became kind of the assistant, or became the news director. She was the assistant news director. She gets bumped up, and then she eventually leaves. And so um, before she left, though, I got this. My wife had started a scrapbook for me. If you're watching, you can see this. It's a memo on handwritten on WOWL station from the general manager, Shane, who says, Kevin, effective Monday, I'm raising your salary to $15,000. I'm looking forward to working. And so got that bump, that first bump. And so a couple months later, that was in April when I got that raise. And then in June of '98, Jennifer ends up leaving the station. And so I get bumped up to news director. Again, it was a very small station. So there wasn't a whole lot to go with. And so I was kind of next in line, if you will. So I became the news director and overseeing things and hiring people. And, it was my first taste of news leadership, if you will. And again, I'm still learning the ropes myself, trying to figure things out. Well, around this time too, we start learning that the guys that own the station, Bruce Lumpkin and Tom Miller, are two businessmen out of the Atlantic who own this TV station in Florence, Alabama. Tom, as I mentioned earlier, was the general manager. Well, I don't remember the exact time, but at some point in the course of this, Tom leaves the area as well. He leaves the station. And so, and while I'm working there, I'm getting all this experience. I'm interviewing people. Again, that scanner, that handheld scanner, go out. That job was the first time I saw a dead body, and was in a little boat, got sucked under a barge in the river right there, not too far from the station. I heard it on the scanner, went down there, saw part of it laying there on the beach that they recovered. Um, and it's those kinds of things, that you really have to prepare yourself for. One day you're covering, the grand opening of a new bank, and the next day you're covering death and destruction. And that is the one side of the news business, not the one side, but that is part of the news business. I think that people want to get in there and be on TV or be famous or be a celebrity or be recognized at the mall or whatever the case may be. Well, you're telling people stories, and sometimes those stories have sad endings. That was one case where that happened, but there were a lot of other things that happened. One time we heard a drug bust it involved a small child, baby. The people that were living in this apartment allegedly had the drugs in the child's diaper and the diaper bag, tried to get out that way with the kid when the police arrived. They got busted. And this was a big bust. 4 people were involved. 4 or 5. I think it was 5. Three men and 2 women. And I remember getting the call and going, and the police would walk them from the police station all the way across the parking, across the street, and then into the detention center. And so they would always call us to get the perp walk, the suspects walking in handcuffs. And I remember getting there, camera on my shoulder, didn't screw this one up. But man, that first guy walked out the front doors and saw all the media out there. It was me and the Huntsville station. They had bureaus all over the shoulders too. And that guy said, F mother effers. And then every word out of their mouth the rest of the way across was F this, F that. And so, back then, that's just the way we did things. We got the video of them, ran the story, fast forward several months. Turns out the police didn't have the proper, they didn't, read them their rights, they didn't have the right warrant when they went to make the arrest. And all 5 of them got no charges. Charges broken. And so we ran a story. We ran a not a retraction, but we ran the story that these 5 that had been arrested, showed their mugshot, showed them walking. They are now free. They are, police messed up. They're probably 2, 3, 4 weeks after that, I'm standing in line for lunch at Hardee's. The cashier gives the 2 guys that are 2 people ahead of me a look. And I'm just kind of watching, I'm being observed. Back then we didn't have phones to be on and be distracted. And those 2 guys turned around and looked at me. And now I'm putting it together who they are. These are 3 of the 5 suspects in that case. And then they started like, hey, ran that story. And I'm like, we also ran a retraction and said, that you guys have been acquitted. Charges have been dropped, whatever, I guess not acquitted, but the charges have been dropped. And they didn't believe me. And I'm like, it's true. We really did. And so they followed, the 2 guys followed me out to my car. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is not going to end well. I'm going to get my ass kicked. They're going to do something to me. So I drove around town for a little bit. Feel like they weren't following me anymore. So then I went back to the station. I did pull the story and had it ready to go in case they really wanted to argue or, they've got an attorney involved or whatever. We ran the fact that they had been with the charges. So those are some of the memorable stories from working in Alabama. This TV station too, by the way, was in a residential area. It was in a neighborhood. There were houses around. And in fact, the owners, the original owners, trying to escape me. Someone from the office listening to this remind me of their names. But anyway, they had a house right there by the station. Well, they wanted a pool. They had gone on vacation and the people were coming to dig the pool. Well, the contractor for the pool screwed up. They dug that pool out in the front yard of the TV station. So this TV station had a swimming pool as well, and we would swim there. So that was kind of a fun, interesting, unique, probably my guess would be one of, if not the only TV station in the country that had a in-ground swimming pool. And so we would swim or go up there on the weekends and hang out and do whatever. Remember one time there was a bad storm, we lost power. So no power, no backup, obviously. We had the basic equipment as it was. So we ended up just spending the rest of the afternoon swimming until the power was restored. Because by then the storm moved through and we were able to go out. Of course, we had the handheld scanners that with us in case something did go on, but Um, it was just a different time. It was a great experience. I remember again that feeling of anticipation, that eagerness, because it was my first like full-time job in the real world, if you will, newly married, gonna provide, going to help them. We were moving. It's a big move. It was, I think, I remember standing in my parents' driveway right before we left. Um, we had gone over to their house. We'd go over there every Sunday for dinner. I remember telling my parents, I was 24, I think, at the time. And I said, I will be back in St. Louis in 2 years. I predicted 2 years. It never happened. And it's what, 20, almost 30 years later, 28 years later, and I'm in Southern Illinois. So, so, um, plans change, as they say. I had a goal in mind. I wanted to win an Emmy by the time I turned 30. That never happened. Um, and so I just remember that first year and a half of working in TV news as being an exciting time. So it was new, it was exciting, the possibilities and all the things that came along with that. It's pre-social media, pre-smartphones, and all that good stuff. And so, I mean, we busted our asses at that station to get content on the air. Again, without having that computer, if you're in TV news, you get it. Our rundowns were handwritten. It was a blank sheet that had spaces to put the the, the slug of the story and then the time that it was going to run, and you would back time it back. So at the bottom of that sheet, I would put in, because you produced, anchored, reported, shot video, you did it all. And eventually you did the news record along with all of it. But you would take your end time, which on 6 was 6:30, and at 10 it was 10:35. And you would put that in, and then you would back time it. So you would go up that column, and you would subtract the time of each story that you were forecasting that story to be, to get to the top of it. And the goal was to have it hit right there at 6 o'clock. It didn't really work that. Sometimes the director would add a commercial break or put a PSA in or something along those lines. Or we might have to get heavy, we'd have to drop something. This is also, and I think I've told this story before, but this was also the station where I infamously dropped the we were not getting any communication from the director at the time, was not talking to me or my co-anchor, wasn't telling us what was going on. We would toss to a video that was supposed to be sound, and there was no sound. And so they would just come right back on the camera. And again, we're not sure what's going on, so we're just trying to get through this. And so when there finally a sound bite pops up, and I can see it's the superintendent of Alabama schools talking on the screen, I said, "What in the fuck is going on?" And I just hear in my ear, and I just kind of sunk in my chair. I panicked, and I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. And my co-anchor at the time, Beth, turned to me and said, "You need to get that air check as soon as it's." So the air check was what they reported. They saved them for a certain. So as soon as the newscast was over, I got that tape. But I didn't get in any trouble at all. The boss, by this time, Tom, who I talked about, was gone, and Bruce, one of the partners, was kind of living in the Shoals during the week and then going back and forth at random. And this podcast is, I'm sharing kind of some of those fun memories of that experience, of my time there. I wouldn't trade that for anything. I loved it. And 6 years ago when I was at WSIL, we actually, my last day at WSIL, we were leaving the vacation to Gulf Shores. And I wanted to tour through the Shoals and just see the area. We hadn't been there since. So it had been 20 years, almost to the day that we had last been in the area. So, as things were kind of going on there at the Owl, and it was called the WOWL, called it the Owl. They used to have they leaned deeply into the Owl in the 50s and 60s with the Owl theme. There was an owl on the bridge, and it was just again, it was a time where young, professional, married, no kids, just kind of living life and having fun and doing the things that so were available there, you know, in the shoals, driving to Huntsville, driving to Nashville, kind of hanging out, chilling, doing whatever. And it was just kind of a different spot. And that's, you know, I look back on that, and it was a good time. It was fun. And now, you know, this story, Alabama doesn't end now. And so as time went on at the we were being told that the station, again, it is NBC affiliate, the NBC affiliate. They don't want to, and they want to broaden the range of the that was the goal to broaden. And so we start hearing about this startup network called EN. And so we find out that the OWL is going to become a UPN affiliate. Along with that comes a change in call letters. It's not going to be the OWL anymore. It's going to be sunset. So UPN is going to roll in broadcast, have a bigger tower, come out of Huntsville. We're told at the time that while there's not going to be news people, we're going to help you guys take care of you. We'll need promotions people, we'll need sales people, so you guys can do that and use our equipment still to create your resume tapes. And if you don't want to stay, then you can make those tapes and go. And I'm talking literally about 4 people that's left. Full time. And so we're all confident that's the way things are going to go. Well, one morning on our call, all the NBC affiliates in the southern region of Alabama, parts of Tennessee, Mississippi, we would get on a call. And everybody would kind of talk about what they were working today, and they would request something, they would put that story on the feed so we could all use it. And so I'm on that call, sitting in the newsroom. One of the NBC affiliates, I can't remember where, he says, "Hey, Florence," they just called him affiliate or by the city, I think. But he said, "Hey, Florence, was your general manager in a car accident last week?" And they said, "Oh, well, we heard he was, and that it was really bad." And so I get off the call and I go talk to Carol, who was our HR person. And Carol, was Bruce's car accident last night? Bruce is one of the coworkers driving back and forth. He had left that previous day to drive to some ceremony for, I think it was back in it for union affiliates. And she kind of wouldn't answer my question. And then a little later that day, Gary, his partner, said, we had station right where he was heading back in the car. And we fallen asleep, feel, lost control, and basically hit the back of the center. We were devastated. Bruce was a nice guy. He was a great guy. He was friendly. He was the one that kind of told us all, you know, let's all switch it over, have jobs, promotions, sales, whatever it is, and for however long it is, you got your back for a family. And we all, you know, believe that. Bruce was again, came off as a very genuine, loving guy. You know? And so I don't think it was very much longer after that. I happened to be up at the station. It was on a Thursday night. I had stopped in for something. Gary was still there that evening. He was talking to Mark, who was my coworker, and he goes, says to me, Evan, do you know anything about this? I'm like, about what? And so Mark says, you know, Bruce had told us that we stick around, yada yada. And he goes, it's just true. Bruce says it's yeah. And then Gary said, and I to this day, June of 19, he says, well, unfortunately, and the exit stayed right at least. I looked at everything that was still, and I said, get your tapes updated. I don't know what's going to happen, but this is not good. And so, sure enough, Friday morning, we walk in, and there's a memo, a memo. Can't even say it to our face. Memo in our mailbox that says mandatory news meeting Monday morning. Report Gary. Cell phones on a thing, or read it. So all weekend we're all stewing, pestering. Everybody's up there at the station working on our tape, putting all of our stuff together. We have a feeling we know what's going to happen. So Monday morning, I go in and I start my operations as the news director slash 6 o'clock producer anchor, getting stuff ready for story and stuff, but knowing we're going to get fired. I knew. Sure enough, I'll go into the conference room. Gary called us in with Dark Carol. And he tells us, again, I'll never forget it. It says, Friday night was your last night. And so Mark brings up, okay, but you're going to fail, or you know what, and you go, you're all done. And said, Carol is here to write you all 2-week severance check, get your things. And James cut check, we're all up in the middle of that stuff. I had a Garfield fish tank that shaped like Garfield with belly. That's why I'm goldfish in my head that lived forever. Had it tucked into my office. I got my wrestling figures and stuff that I'm clearing out of my office. And Mark looks at the check and says, this is one. He said 2 weeks paid here. So then we had to sit around and wait for the checks. We all go, I think we all go to the local bar and grill, if you will. And it's 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We sit there and we all are getting our happy hour. I remember sitting there, you know, I wonder if that are around watching us and saying, hey, that's the news, or the news 15. If they knew we were done, they never ever had to use again. They ran into a market at spot until they did officially switch affiliation in HTF, I think, Huntsville, Gator, Florence. They moved to Huntsville. The building there closed, the pool got covered up when we went back. That's went back to the building is still there. And it was sad, you know. One, the loss of life with Bruce, and 2, the loss of the job. My wife was 4 months pregnant, so pregnancy earlier here. I remember Gary sitting there. So, you wanted me to be back. I don't know. I was less guilty about the fact that I pregnant wife Gonna find a job. You know, I'm gonna get out of here. Or, you know, and I was already looking, but obviously that is a fun start. But you know, close to the money and project and stuff. What's lot of pretty good story for the podcast. But I'm gonna read this last thing about this ended up being 4 days after. I guess the next day, I'm not gonna read the full. WOWL WOWL ended its local news broadcast in one day in preparation. Gary Sneller, the owner and general manager of the station, said establishing television Monday. This is the part of it. Most of the news staff plans to seek jobs in other news operations. Said, we will help them in any way we can. He said they have been terrific folks. Yes, we had been terrific folks. They didn't help at all. That day that he fired us all was the last time that we saw or heard anything from him or anybody that was in there. So it was disappointing, you know, but obviously he couldn't go and say that. They didn't, the newspaper didn't comment from any of the people that were fired or affected or that. So I left on a bitter note, but it took about 6 weeks and then I reflected on it, but got a job, you know, luckily my wife was working at the yeah, it all came to a sour end, and I guess theoretically, hindsight, I could have thrown in the towel then to move back to Swiss, could have done something else, got the job too, didn't stay with it, keep with it. And I think in hindsight, I stuck in it, but I would, so I think that's another. But I want to thank everyone for listening and watching this not less than podcast. Do that next week. Chad will likely join me. Probably more involved in some of that full COVID thoughts that I have right now. So, thank you for tuning in and weighing in and letting me know what you want to hear. I will tell the WLFI West Lafayette story at some point. Get back more to WSIL there. So plenty there. I talked about doing the college years, talk about that at some point, maybe next month. Don Weston should be about that since it is that time. Heading into the college season, and then of course some folks looking for market tips. I'm always available for any question. Yeah, so thanks for listening and or watching to this episode. We will see you.